It's the return of the boom arm and the purple boxes from Fanhome, and you know what that means. It's time to continue our series as we assemble the Iron Man Mark III armor from Fanhome.com. So without further ado, let's open it up and get started. Looking at everything outside the box, there's a few familiar faces. You'll probably recognize this with the little friction discs. That was the wrist piece that we assembled last time. And this looks familiar as well, but I'm not sure what these are, so we'll have to figure that out. So without further ado, let's crack open the comics and take a look. Digging into episode 19, this is a fun one. So it opens up with Tony not getting along with others, as is his tradition. And entitled Iron Man Against All, we get a bit of a dash of his fight with Night Thresher and with the Hulk and with Thunderstrike and various other would-be friends that Tony ended up having to reconcile with over time, but just further proving that he does not play well with others. So we're going to get into the build in a bit. We'll fast forward here and check out the rest. So this section goes over Tony Stark's relationship with Iron Man and his relationship with the nation of Wakanda. So early on, T'Challa joined the Avengers, but had intended to spy on them back when he wore a cape, which we've gone over this in The Incredibles. Not a great idea. So he joined to spy on the Avengers to see if they were really what they said that they were all about. And even during the start of Civil War, when you started to have the crossover with the X-Men, and you got the introduction of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, which, by the way, if you want to see a fabulous fight between a bunch of lawyers, you can go find out why they had to kill him off in the movies. So after that Civil War, Tony is kind of on the outs with T'Challa, and T'Challa goes back to Wakanda for the wedding of Storm and T'Challa, which obviously we didn't have that in the movie. Some changes there, and they end up getting back together. He joins the Avengers fully and kind of reveals that he just wanted to see what they were really all about. And the Rise of the Red Skull happens, and yeah, these comics do get convoluted, don't they? This next section is called Armor for a New Century, and it's about the return armor. The return armor was kind of touched on in some of the movies. So in the second Iron Man movie, you'll remember that Tony had the briefcase. That was kind of a big plot point when he ran into Whiplash. Well, that was actually a big part of the return armor. The return armor was damaging Tony physically. It was damaging his body and his skin, and we saw some of that with, you know, the stripiness in his neck. And in that return armor, he ended up making it a more compact version, which was the briefcase that we saw in the movie. So after that, he changed it to kind of some nano armor that could fly to him, which we've obviously seen that in multiple iterations throughout the movies. So without further ado, let's go back to assembly, and you guys can read all of this when you get your own copy. For this next assembly piece, we're going to be adding a forearm cover to the left forearm that we already made. You might remember that from the last episode, but I already have a forearm cover, and I already have an elbow joint, so we're gonna end up holding onto these and see maybe if we end up using them later, but we can at least put on that elbow joint that we already assembled last time, and it looks like so. So we officially have a completed forearm. I'll make sure that's on there tight. There we go. Let's go ahead and set it aside. Just for kicks and giggles, we will go ahead and assemble this piece really quickly. And we will set both of these aside. Perhaps they gave me these out of order, and I might need these for when we build the right forearm. So we'll set those inside of our box, which is getting quite heavy at this point. Move on to stage 3, joining the elbow to the forearm. Well, I just did that. So at this point, I guess this portion of the build is done. That was probably the quickest we'll ever do a build. So I'll be right back and we'll take a look at the next comic. So episode 20 is listed as a special movie edition. And, well, you had to know we were gonna get here eventually. It's about Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 is definitely a divisive movie, and it has some good parts and it has some just bafflingly bad parts. But it does set up a lot of stuff from the comics, even though it changes quite a bit. Obviously the Mandarin is vastly changed from his role in the comics. But it does set up a lot of things like the house party protocol, and the way Extremis is used is vastly changed in the movie, which we'll get into in this last section. We're just gonna skip right past that movie section on Iron Man 3. I guess that kind of tells you my thoughts on that movie. But this section goes over Extremis, and it talks a little bit about just some bafflingly crazy things that Tony decided to do in his time fighting Dr. Killian and Maya Hansen. So obviously Maya is responsible for developing Extremis and with Killian's help. And she uses it basically in conjunction with the military to give them an advantage in the field, but you can't climb into that pool and not get wet, so they say. And so she ends up in some pretty bad situations, and a lot of people end up dead. But it's the way that it's used in the comic that's a little bit different. So it goes over it in this small section, but there's over 100 comics on this, I think. But basically Tony is realizing the shortcomings of his armor, that it's always going to be a man inside of a machine. So he makes the completely insane choice to take Extremis himself. He battles Killian, is injured, loses, and decides to work with Maya to modify the Extremis protocol so that way he can take it himself and create a direct brain to suit interface. Now, we've seen this in both the Avengers movies and also in Iron Man 3, where he gains the ability to control the machines of his suits and have them come to him and attach. And you know, obviously we have lots of Hollywood fun with that, you know, flying through the air and then all the machines, you know, jump onto him, that kind of thing. But all of that came from that Extremis brain to armor link. So I encourage you to read that. It's really interesting, and it'll give you some background on how all this was handled in the movies, and obviously you'll be able to see some of those changes. So let's get back to assembly. We're back in familiar territory. We're gonna assemble a shoulder joint. So you might recall last time, you could watch me in the previous episode fight with the masking tape. These friction discs are literally just masking tape cut with a little circle there. So if you want to watch me struggle, watch the previous episode. But without further ado, let's get these put together. First things first, this friction disc goes inside the, wrong piece, right inside these outside joint pieces. So we're gonna slip it in there, and then you'll see there's two little notches. Those just hit these two notches here in the side, so it has a place to stop. So we're gonna do that on each side. And then you'll see that we're gonna slide them all together just like so. So we'll take the one that has the peg, and you'll see that this butts up against the back there, so it'll control how far the shoulder piece moves. And then I'm gonna lay this on top, and then place this just over the top of it. Sure everything still moves, and then grab the nut, drop it into the hole with the nut shape so it'll hold it in place automatically. And just like so, don't over tighten because you want this to be able to move. And just like that, we have a working shoulder joint. Piece of cake. I hope you're still having as much dorky fun as I am. So let's go to episode number 21. So this one covers a lot of the fight between the Mandarin Tony and War Machine. Now, if you thought the Avengers was packed full of people and you're like, just wow, this cast is huge. Well, it could have been much, much larger. In this fight with the Mandarin where he conquers the city of Hong Kong, it's Tony Stark and Rhodey and Scarlet Witch and Spider-Woman and Sentry and US Agent all battling together to take him down. So that's a whole story that goes into the start of the Rings of Power and really the start of the Avengers and the Infinity War saga. So if you want to really get into all of the ways that the Mandarin was completely mishandled by Marvel in the movies, I suggest you start here. So check out Hands of the Mandarin, and we'll get back to assembly after we take a look at the back half of this particular comic, which goes over Tony Stark and inventing the future. This section of the episode goes into Tony Stark and Stark Industries as an entity. Its evolution through time and becoming Stark International, international offshoots, and also some crossovers with some names that you probably wouldn't have expected so far. So there was a point where Obadiah Stane's son had taken over Tony's business. There was a crossover where Norman Osborn's group had taken over Tony's business. It's all about Tony's inner demons. So his struggle with alcoholism and his dependence on the Iron Man suit and really being unsure of how to define himself without it. So there's a lot of great kind of internal struggle stuff, but it goes into a lot of Tony Stark as a man, but also Tony Stark as a businessman. This next section, because Tony Stark is not short on prototypes, goes over the single-use moon armor that he made. So Hank Pym discovered that Tony's Iron Man suits were damaging him, something that we've seen throughout the Iron Man series, by heating up his body tissue and not allowing it to regenerate. So Tony built this moon armor that would hopefully allow him to alleviate that. And at the same time, he comes face to face with a familiar face from the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, Ronan the Conqueror. So whenever we see that crossover occur, if that ever, well, I guess with Tony being dead, it's not going to occur, but had that occurred, it would not have been the first time that Tony had run into the Kree species. So he also ended up teaming up with the Fantastic Four to take down Ronan. So there's a lot of crossover potential that we're just never gonna see because of the way that they framed the Avengers movies. And nothing against them, I think they turned out great. But there's obviously a lot more stories that could have been told in previous phases of the Marvel movies, because Lord knows we just don't have enough of those, right? So without further ado, let's go back to assembly. For this next section, we need to assemble the left shoulder joint. We're going to continue assembling that. So the problem that we're going to run into is we need to identify which one of these is which. We just assembled these in the last section. Well, if you look over here in the lower right corner, you're going to get your clue as to which one's which. If you bend this exactly like it is in the picture, you can see this has two screw holes there and this does not, which means the correct one is this one. So first things first, identify which piece you're gonna need, and we're gonna grab this frame. We're gonna grab one of these frame springs, and we're gonna take these screws out of the container, and then we can get started. So we take this HP screw, and this little spring here, we're gonna lay it over that protrusion, and hopefully not drop the screw as we lock it in place. This is one of those fiddly bit moments. But looks like we're successful. So we're going to do that to both sides. Don't lock this down quite yet because you don't know exactly where it needs to be. We're going to do the other side. Magnetized screwdriver, very good idea for this. That is a downside for how long these take to assemble. I don't know where my awesome Iron Man one is, so I'm ending up using one of my other screwdrivers instead. Nothing special about it, just it looked cool. All right, so we've got those screws in place and we've got the springs hanging there. I've purposely left them loose. This frame piece here is going to slide. It can only go one way. And again, we've identified the correct one because, let me grab the other one and demonstrate. It can only go in that way. So on here, it can only go in this way, which is exactly what we want. It looks just like the picture here. So the next part is using the pair of tweezers. We're gonna grab this little end and we're gonna extend it over this hole and get it locked into place. It shouldn't be that hard. This thing isn't meant to hold the weight of the world. Might have to open that just a little bit to get it to stay. All right, just like the picture. This last bit of assembly is just getting these last two shoulder joint pieces in place. Like a lot of the other pieces that we've done, there's a small hole and a large hole, so it's impossible to mess this up. Just align that track slot with the piece we just assembled and pushes in place just like that. And we do the same thing to the other side. What about this other piece? Well, hold on to it. We're gonna need it for the next piece in the next issue. This last comic's a bit of a doozy, and not just because we're getting into some of the more crazy stuff between Tony and Rhodey, but because we're actually gonna finish at least the bulk of one of the arms. So it's starting to come together. Without further ado, let's open up episode 22. So this particular episode goes over Tony's complicated relationship with Rhodey. Rhodey and Tony had verbal sparring sessions on the regular, but at one point Tony finally pushed back and said, you know what, why don't you just do better? So that's what Rhodey set out to do. And on his own, he got to team up with Deathlock and Cable, as well as take on a whole manner of African warlords and basically anything that was outside the purview of the UN and SHIELD allowed him to intervene as War Machine. So this gets into that, as well as, we're gonna skip past this because we're gonna get back to it. Pepper Potts. So this one's fun because it really shows the evolution of the character. Pepper started off as kind of a pinup character. She was in love with Tony Stark, because who wasn't, but Happy started off as more of a, brutish boxer, ex-boxer, and he was Tony's right-hand man, just like he is in the comics, or in the movies, I should say. But Pepper evolved over time, so she went from being this pinup type character to more of an executive assistant, like we see in the movies, and for the better. So ultimately, she falls in love with Happy, but that's not Happy. They really went through some rough times, there were some infidelities, and ultimately, spoiler alert, Happy is killed. So Pepper has to reevaluate kind of her place in Tony's world, and Tony has to reevaluate Pepper's world as well. And unfortunately, she gets injured, and Tony, of course, does what Tony does. He builds her a suit. So we see that in Iron Man 3. We get the rescue suit for just a second, which is really just kind of a borrowed suit in that movie. I know it was built for her, so it fit, but if you look in the comic here, you can see a more refined rescue suit. So ultimately, that suit helped Pepper recover using repulsor technology, and when Tony did that, he put Jarvis inside that suit. Well, in true comic fashion, Jarvis went a little nuts, fell in love with Pepper. That turned into a whole thing. They had to destroy the suit. So naturally, Tony then built her another suit because, of course. So yeah, that kind of starts the whole Jarvis split that we saw lead to the Avengers stuff. But obviously we have a bit of a different take on it. All of that was during a fight with Norman Osborn's organization. So there's a lot to unpack in this particular episode, and I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun, and again, it shows some of the really big differences that we see between the comics and what comes to life in our movies. The last piece of this comic is continuing to assemble the left arm and connecting it with the right arm piece. So I've gone ahead and taken the two stickers here and attached them to these arm covers. So these are supposed to protect the plastic pieces that might rub against it. Will just help with some of the friction should you move the thing around. So I've gone ahead and done that off camera so I don't embarrass myself. So without further ado, we're gonna grab the forearm from a previous episode and we're going to attach it to, looks like the outer arm cover. So that's the one that has this gold piece on top. So we're going to set that there. Once again, you can't mess this up. There's a square there and a circle there. That's gonna marry up with the square there and the circle. And then we're going to drop a screw into it. That's gonna be tricky, but we can do it. Always need extra hands with these, but just like that. I'm gonna take that piece off so it's out of my way. Oh, I'm trying to put a screw in a place where there isn't one. So there's a post there to hold it in place and this screw locks it in. So we're gonna make sure that that screw is nice and tight, which it is. Now it's starting to look, well, you can start to get an idea of just how big this whole model is going to be. It's gonna be pretty awesome. All right, so the next part we're gonna do is attach this ball joint to the overall assembly. Next, we're going to take this ball joint here and we're going to attach it to the arm. So the way this works, there's a mechanical connection here. Oh, there's a mechanical connection there where this is kind of sitting in that channel. And this piece here, you can see there's a notch. That's going to go right here. The notch goes around that post. But obviously, this is not actually connected to this in any way. But the mechanical piece here, that connection point, will take care of it. So we'll put that in place, kind of levitate it there for a second, get two screws, lock it down. And just like that, we have a bicep, a forearm, and an elbow. So we'll throw this elbow cover back on. Oops. And again, you can start to get an idea of just how big this is going to be. So now we're going to flip it over. Oh, I found that other screw. And we're going to close it up by placing this on the other side. So hold that thought. Now that we've got the page turned, the last part is simple. This post and this circle match up and closes right up, just like that. Quick function test before we close it. Looks like that circles easily and that moves easily. So I do believe we are set. So we're gonna lock down these last four pieces. All right, I think we've got this fully locked down now. No seams. So we will throw this elbow joint back on because it keeps coming off. Come on, Tony, put yourself together. And there we go. We have a fully assembled arm. Getting there. I can't thank Fanhome enough for this opportunity. This is really one of the coolest things I've gotten to do. So big thanks to them. Again, I can't recommend this enough. This is super high quality stuff. So stay tuned for our next assembly. I'm Ron Burke, Editor-in-Chief for GamingTrend.com, saying stay safe out there, and we'll see you again very soon.